like my first time walking into the classroom, it was like one of those scenes from like a stereotypical like 1990s like
Yep.
inner city teacher movie. I mean,
Dangerous
like
Minds or
these
something like that. The
these like
substitute.
they're
Yeah.
like these Latina girls like doing their makeup, speaking
Mhm.
Spanish, and like other kids sitting in the corner swearing.
Yep. Yep.
Um, you kids smoking it out the window, and I'm like, what the hell is this?
Hello and welcome to the next episode of Cylinder Radio. I'm your host, Will Roosh, high school educator in Los Angeles, bringing viewpoint diversity and now talking about all things education. And my guest today is someone that I've been interacting with back and forth for, I'd say for years, just in similar lanes, but we haven't done a podcast yet. We haven't really connected, face to face like this, even though this is online. And I'm excited for him to share his journey and also his thoughts, because he's been in the world of talking about education and what's wrong with education, especially a lot of the stuff around ideological capture and a lot of the propaganda and the way that schools have kind of been taken over by specific ideologies and things like that. So Fank McCormick, Chalkboard Heresy on Substack and on social media and everything like that. It's really great to connect with you, man. I'm glad that you're here, and I would love to just dive into more about your story and kind of what you're seeing in education and how what's going on right now as we record this. It's like Trump is the president-elect, but they're talking about the education system in a way I've never heard it talked about before. Like, I feel like there's an opportunity, there's some optimism here among us, like kind of rebel educator types who are saying like, this is the chance to, we have an opportunity here to maybe make some real changes in the way schooling is done in America. So I'm trying to have as many conversations with people that I think can contribute to that like realm as much as possible. So it's great to like formally, talk to you about this stuff, because I know we've just kind of talked on the phone here and there and over texting and stuff, but it's great to have you here, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Will. It's great to finally do this.
Right. Yeah. It's a long time coming. So,
Yeah.
Can you just introduce, I'm sure some of my audience is familiar with you, but for those that aren't, can you just tell us your story about like your background as an educator, and then kind of what was the process like for you to kind of tumble down the rabbit hole like Alice in Wonderland to get to where you are now, and how you're advocating for certain things in education and everything like that?
Sure. So yeah, I went into teaching, let's see, this is about 2010. And I went into public education at high school. It's, what they call like a urban high need school, which is just code for, mostly Hispanic, Black students, high poverty. And I also did some private school work at Loyola Academy in Wilmette. So I would regularly go back there in the summer and teach their honors program.
Okay, where was this at?
And,
where were you teaching at?
So Waukegan Public Schools was like my main gig. And then in the summers, I did Loyola Academy, which is a Jesuit school. It's in Wilmette. It's a Jesuit school.
Okay.
Great school.
Yeah. But like where, I don't even know like what state.
Oh, Illinois.
Illinois. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, like, well, I know. So Wilmette's pretty close to Chicago, maybe like 20 minutes away. Yeah.
I should have picked up the accent. Okay.
Yeah, I know. A lot of people say I have an accent. I just don't. I don't know.
Yes, it's that Chicago accent. Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm sorry. So sorry. Good job. But so in Illinois, public school, did some work with private schools. Okay.
Yeah. And I mean, gosh, how did I get here? It's hard to concisely summarize. I mean, look, I went into public education like really a true believer in the system. Public schools, especially in like this poor community, they're going to be like beacons of hope for a lot of these kids that don't have an opportunity. That's why, a lot of people are like, well, why did you choose Waukegan? For a little background, Waukegan, it's high needs. It's probably about 65% Hispanic, 20% Black, very small white minority that mostly left over time. A lot of immigrants, a lot of, immigrants that are legal, which has created some tension with the Black community. So yeah. It's a pretty it's an interesting community. It was a fun community in a lot of ways, but it was never boring. And there were a lot of challenges that came with working at school, gangs, behavior discipline, fights, all that type of stuff. And I would say even just, my first kind of impression when I got in there was this overwhelming sense of really like depression based on the conditions. Like everything was just like this rundown 1970s style institution where everything was old, dated, crumbling, falling apart. It was just bleak. And that made it hard to work there. But, I really, for the first half of my career, really kept pushing like, okay, like change is possible. And I can be the best teacher I can be. I'm going to be a leader. I'm going to go against the grain and really try new things. Because, when you have 12 and 13% of your students at academic proficiency levels, in my mind, you know, adhering to the status quo is, makes you a villain. So I pushed back a lot. I did a lot of research on different kind of methods of teaching and instructional strategies. In some ways, it was very traditional, really worked to build a strong classroom culture, first of order. When you have kids that are like won't even sit down, listening to me. I mean, it was like my first time walking into the classroom, it was like one of those scenes from like a stereotypical like 1990s like inner city teacher movie. I mean,
Dangerous
like,
Minds or something like that.
Yeah,
The
these like
Substitute.
they're like these Latina girls like doing their makeup, speaking Spanish, and like other kids sitting in the corner swearing.
Yep.
You kids smoking it out the window, and I'm like, what the hell is this? So
Yeah.
I really got noticed in a positive way first by my principal, but I divided and conquered, and I had within about 60 days that classroom was transformed. I mean, it was like they couldn't believe it. They'd walk in. And so then I was like, okay, so I've got some respect and attention. And then I started to want to do other things. I started pushing kind of back against problems I saw in the institution, whether it was kind of collective apathy, whether it was systems that weren't working, and lack of accountability. And that's when you'd start to get these talks where administrators would like pull you in, like can I ambush you and be like, Frank, we really like you. We really like what you're doing. You're getting a bit of a reputation as a rabble rouser. People, we like things to go kind of smoothly here. Just, it's a good job. You get paid regularly, unionized, good benefits. What are you doing, man? What are you doing?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'd kind of like, try to use reason, well, this is no, we get that. But, it makes other teachers uncomfortable and, you're kind of standing out. And sometimes you'd get the like, some teachers think that, you think you're better than they are because of what you're doing in your classroom. You're not looking to like make other people look bad, are you? And, this just kind of continued. And some of my earliest big battles were like over curriculum. Like there was no curriculum. So I spent a lot of time learning how to build curriculums, how to design what makes an effective curriculum. And I just kept getting this pushback. Like they're like, hey, look, we got a curriculum. Here's the textbook. Here's some bullet points of what you teach. I'm like, that's not a curriculum. They're kind of like, Frank, like, don't bring this up. Don't push this. Like, and I'm like, no, like you need a curriculum to teach.
Yeah.
And that's where then they started the talks like, look, if you keep kind of pushing back, if you keep challenging the status quo, sometimes, they'll never say themselves. They'll be like, there's people that say like, why should we bother hiring this guy? Why should we give him tenure? And it's really hard if you've don't get tenured going to another district because they're going to be like, what happened there? So why don't you just kind of like go along for the ride? And so I kind of had to learn to navigate that for a while. But that takes a chunk out of your soul when you start to compromise and you start to play that game. And I'd start to go into meetings and, whether it was you'd see something wrong, or you hear something wrong, or you'd see apathy, and you just kind of like I knew what I wanted to say, but I'd have to be like, I'm all good, man, because my strategy was, we'll get to the point of where you're tenured, and then you can start to push back. And eventually I was. My fifth year, I was tenured. I was one of like 3% of teachers that scored excellent on the Danielson evaluation framework, which almost never happens. I mean, they score people proficient, but the principal at the time was like, I can't. She's like, I know they want me to, evaluate you as proficient because it just sets a record that like you've never been excellent. She's like, but you've done an outstanding job. So after that, I was like, okay, now I can start to really push back. And, the ways I pushed back was some of them were really, I mean, I didn't think they were necessarily controversial. They were just kind of like ensuring my students had basic things met. Like, we didn't like the whiteboard was like cracked and scratched in half and I couldn't use it. And I was like, hey, can we get a new one? And that, I kept pushing on it. It was like 8 months later, and they're like, Frank, you're causing trouble. And so they'd find ways to make your life difficult. They'd have you move across 3 different classrooms throughout the day. They'd give you extra sections. It was stuff like that. But for a lot of the, let's see, through like years 5 through 10, they kind of would let me do what I want as long as I didn't raise too much trouble. So I had to kind of like compromise, like, okay, I'll build my own curriculum. I'm going to teach the way I want. My classroom is going to be this unique kind of bubble in the school. They never came in. They didn't want to know about it as long as they didn't hear too much from me. I just be like, okay, if I need the windows clean, I'm going to have to do it myself. If I need a whiteboard, I'm going to have to buy it myself, whatever. Um, Things really started to change though. Those last, let's see, I would say even before the last 2 years, I'd say probably 2016 when Donald Trump was first elected, there was this kind of massive, I wouldn't say ideological shift. I would say shift in the perspective about what the teacher's role in the classroom is. It became, look, there had always been kind of an activist presence among a lot of teachers, but it became really like a calling now for that. Like Donald Trump has been elected. We cannot repeat this mistake. We have to be explicitly political in our classrooms and activists. And like there for the day after the election, for example, there's one teacher, she was going around putting up like, propaganda. Or, I mean, that's what it was.
Yeah.
Around. No one challenged her. And you started seeing other stuff, from school administrators. There was, I remember like our principal, and she put up a board, and it was like a picture of like a group of black students. That's like, you tried to bury us, but you didn't know we're seeds. And I asked her, I'm like, who's trying to bury them? She's like, well, like certain people. I'm like
Who?
me, and you start like me. And you started getting then, I mean, just everything started changing. Behavior policies. They started to talk to us about like disparities between white, Hispanic, black behavior rates. And so, black student misbehaves to a point where it's really bad. Even sometimes like, making sexual remarks to female, you send them to the office, you'd start to get looked at. If it was a white student or a Hispanic student, it wouldn't raise as much of an eyebrow. But then they'd start to ask questions like, you seem to have trouble relating to these students. You don't really understand their culture. This is just how they are. You'd report like, for example, bullying, and they'd be like, black kids have a way of talking to each other that's a little more kinesthetic. Like I was like, no, like there was a small black kid being pushed by a couple other large black kids. Like, yeah, this is how they are. And they like, we looked at it on camera, and they're like, yeah, like let's just not raise an issue on this. So you had this kind of cultural shift in terms of behavior reporting. And then you had teachers more explicitly become activists. We had a teacher that was hired, and it was the new superintendent came in, and her big push was we need more black educators, that there's white supremacy in the school district, there's white privilege amongst the teachers, because 70 to 80% of the teachers were white. It doesn't match the student body. So what does that look like? I know there's a lot of like people will talk like broadly, like, oh, when you have affirmative action hiring, you don't get good quality. But I'll just talk about like personal experience. And again, this is anecdotal, but they hired this guy, and our principal basically admitted it to our team. She said he is a well-known black educator in Chicago. He's going to do a really good job relating to these kids. He'll be able to speak in a way that they understand. And it turned out to be a disaster. I mean, and again, I know this is anecdotal, but this just shows what happens when you make hiring decisions based solely on someone's identity. He was using F words against kids. He was complaining. He was screaming at them. He was telling them that like like they're race traitors almost, that he's like ashamed to be black because of how they behave. Because I think he was more like a middle class black dude, and these were kids from a high poverty area. So if anything, he actually understood them less than I did because he was kind of new, and he was like, "You guys are a disgrace," would make comments about them coming from single family homes and just terrible. And then his curriculum was entirely based on social justice. He was an English teacher, but it became all about like modern day oppression of black people, stories about the police. I mean, it was just constant. And I really started to realize the effect it was having on kids when they were doing like a modern civil day rights project. And the premise was in his class, it was basically like, how is what is it like to be black today? And a few of the kids showed me pictures of like the civil rights movement, the dogs, and they said that, and the fire hoses from like the 60s from Birmingham. And I said, "Oh, you're doing a history project." They said, "No, like this is like what's going on today." And I was like, I said, "You realize these pictures are like, almost 60 years old?" They're like, "Huh?" They didn't know. Now, I'm not saying that he purposefully didn't correct them. I think he was a bad teacher, but then you start to see more of this in other classrooms. They opened up the first African American history class, and who's going to be against African American history? But what was the topic of every day? It was something about the black experience in America connected to the historical root of oppression in a way that look, and I'm not saying you can't make those connections. And of course, as a historian, there are things that happen in the past obviously affect present day conditions. But when you have students coming into class and the objective written on the board is, how is modern day policing like Confederate slave patrols? I was just blown away. Like, I could deal with that being asked as a question. Is there any similarity?
Right.
I still think, it's a pretty kind of loaded question to ask. Yeah. But saying how, like, I've already established the argument, you come in and prove it. And the more I started to look at what other teachers were doing, I started digging into our school's new DEI department, the more I found this stuff explicitly. And kind of the smoke, when I realized things were really bad, was I did some FOIAs in 2021. And I wish I can send him to you. I'll show you. But like, they brought some students and teachers to like this. It was like a revolutionary youth conference. And I'm not kidding you. It starts with the native land acknowledgement. Okay.
First,
they have the opening picture, and they have students here, is showing like communist revolutionaries, Black Panthers with like machine guns and rifles. And it says, "Welcome, comrades." And I said, can you imagine if you invited like a group of white students and white specific teachers, and you had like, Mussolini and the Italian fascists and the Hitler youth in pictures holding guns and saying like, "Welcome, brothers." I just couldn't believe it. Like, my jaw dropped. I started showing it to other people. I had a friend who's a college professor. She's left leaning. She's now probably more classical liberal, but I think, I kind of said, "Hey, is this out of line?" I said, you're a child psychologist. I said, "You work in the university, you understand, kind of academic ethics better than I." And she was like, "What on earth is going on?" I'm like, "I know." And, it was basically talking about how to kind of turn students into the change makers, which was, I think, code for really revolutionary, and to destabilize the existing kind of system we have in America and rebuild it from a revolutionary framework. Now, look, adults want to talk about, if you want to be a revolutionary on your own time and talk about that. I mean, I may have problems with that. I actually like living in this republic. I think despite all its flaws, my family came here just a generation ago for a reason, and I really enjoy it. But that's on you. But bringing that into schools with the explicit, I mean, they weren't even hiding this explicit mandate to basically radicalize students. And then I saw what happened in 2020 with the George Floyd riots, and I saw how many of my former students and young college people were kind of bought into this mentality, but embraced it so fully as part of their core. It wasn't just about, because with the George Floyd thing, so I saw, I was like, oh, these are terrible images. This is terrible. But there was a vigil in town. I went to listen to them. I remember nodding and being like, yeah, this was, this was really handled poorly, and it's a tragedy. We should have this conversation. But it started to become, tearing down statues of founding fathers. I'm not talking like, Confederate statues built in the Jim Crow era. I'm talking like Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, spray painting Revolution on the walls. And I saw a lot of my former students they hadn't even gone to, most of them hadn't gone to college. And they were, bringing this forward into social media. They were posting pictures of themselves, engaged in these kind of things in their own town. I mean, their own town got tore up. It was tragic. A lot of Hispanic businesses, grocery stores that didn't have insurance were smashed just out of pure rage and anger. And I started to realize that they picked up a lot of this throughout their, journey through probably mostly high school. That, look, people will sometimes say, well, you think that like schools are indoctrination centers? No, I don't. It's not like, there's the stereotype where it's like 24/7 every day in the school. But there is a cumulative effect when you have enough teachers do it enough times. It starts to become, your reality. And as a student, you really do listen to your teachers.
Yeah.
And it happened to me. I mean, I look back, it didn't happen to me as much in high school. It was much more frowned upon back then to bring politics in the classroom. But in college, I had teachers that were very explicitly political, and I really looked up to these guys. And look, many of them, I liked them. They were nice guys. They were good teachers. But when I look back at, being 18, and I was 18, 19, 20, and being taught, just one side of an issue, and how I became very strongly associated with the left because of that. Like, I thought I was hearing the gospel truth. I wasn't exposed to different ideas until much later. It wasn't until, I started listening to other people. I was like, maybe I don't have the whole picture. And then my experience in public education, that was kind of a crisis of faith when you put all this faith and trust and belief in this institution that is supposed to be kind of like the pillar of liberal democracy, and you just see failure, corruption, and malfeasance everywhere. And that's when I decided, I'm going to say something. So, of course, I did it in the most, frank style possible. I'm somewhat, my students always just say, Mr. McCormick, you're extra. Because, I'm a bit of a character, and I get that. And I like to joke around a lot. I do have a lot of energy. It sometimes can be a little sensational. But I wanted to bring a lot of attention to it as well. I saw there were other people on like social media, teachers, and they were talking about it in a way that just wasn't getting anyone listening. If you have 100 people following you and you're saying something great, I mean, that's great. But so, I did try and kind of build this brand and built up an audience and got people talking about it. And really my main concern, if you could look, sometimes people like to find like certain tweets I've said. You said, look, I have 22,000 tweets. I would say that conservatively 10% are things I'd probably walk back or say I was joking, or yeah, I've changed my mind on that. But that's the nature of when you're on social media, and you do it I do a lot of stream of consciousness. Sometimes I just throw ideas out there, and the next day I'm like, yeah, I'm not sure I really believe that anymore, because I've been debating with people and they presented better arguments. But anyway, what was I saying? The basic gist of my argument was that, school instruction should be as minimally ideological as possible. It should be nonpartisan. I realize it's impossible. You can't, everything is ideological to some degree, but there should be a strong attempt to have some sort of ideological neutrality. And to do that, we have to first admit there's a problem. We have to recognize it. This is a problem. And until we do that, we can't talk about solutions. The problem was the amount of rage and anger and hate I got directed at me just because I was saying, I think, what a lot of people instinctively knew. Even other teachers in my district that would privately message me to other teachers across the country. Yeah, you're right. I just was saying what wasn't supposed to be said. Looking back on it, did I get, as people start to go to war with me, including my school district, did I fight back? Yeah, that was stressful. Would I do it again? I'm in the same way. I'm not sure. I think I was trying to kind of inspire other people to stand like, hey, if I can really show that like these guys can come at me with everything they got, threaten my job, try and embarrass me, and I fight back and keep being defiant and do it with a sense of humor and mock them. Maybe other people stand up. I don't know, how effective that was or whether I'd do it again. But what really surprised me though through the whole thing was that we couldn't even get to have a discussion about solutions because no one wanted to admit there was a problem. They said, you're just, you're lying, you're grifting, you're making this up. I'm like, why would I do that? Like, what? First of all, to anyone that thinks like there's a lot of money in this, there's not. I mean,
Yeah.
I wish there was like dark money flowing into my bank account. I mean, it was financially, I took a hit for years and only recently have started to recover because I was getting a regular paycheck. I lost my pension, health insurance. So there was no financial incentive for this.
So how'd you get let go of it? Like, how did that come to be that you were pushing back? How did it go from pushing back, asking questions, which is fundamentally educational? How did it go from that to you losing your tenured position? Isn't that what tenure is supposed to be? Is your ability to take risks?
Yeah. So it's complicated how it worked out. They started pulling me into like meetings with like their attorney, the school district. And they were like, yeah, you have the freedom to say what you want on social media, but there's also, they vaguely hint at consequences. And if parents complain, we can do things and you could lose your license. And an administrator who was a friend of mine who supported what I did, who was kind of leaking me stuff, told me, he's like, Frank, they're going to try and evaluate you out. They're going to find a way to get, because, you haven't said anything online that like, like it may be controversial, it may be provocative, but it's not a risk to students. It's not discriminatory in any of those ways. So they can't get rid of that. He said, but they're going to find a way to like screw you over on your evaluation. And I just at that point I was like, I don't want to lose my license. I don't want to go out like that. I don't want the fight to be like all of a sudden I was an excellent rated teacher to a needs improvement to an unproficient and go. I mean, I was like, no. So at that point, I realized like the train was. I described it to people as like one of those Wild West movies where you're on a burning train, and you see the bridges out ahead, and I'm like, this is where it's going. And I realized like because I had a family that I had to jump into some other type of job before I just let it crash. And so I went to a board meeting, kind of ripped into the superintendent, the whole system, and then resigned thereafter. And you lose the position. You're going to be kind of blacklisted because of it. You don't get to take your pension with you. But at least I felt like, okay, well, they didn't, I left on my terms. I still left as regardless of what they want to say in hindsight, with lots of letters of recommendation and really good evaluations. And I wasn't going to let them tarnish that to get back at me because they didn't like what I was saying.
Wow. Yeah. So there's so much there to unpack. One thing you mentioned, one of the issues that come up, I just had Corey DeAngelis on a podcast recently and talking about like, he's like big on like school vouchers and funding students, not schools. And you talked about how you had a cracked whiteboard and it took like the whole year to get that fixed. But then you said right away the DEI department was established. So like it's when people say like, funding for public schools, it's not the funding that's the issue. It's where the money is allocated. It's never like how much does a whiteboard cost compared to how much do the salaries of these consultants and experts come in to where the money is actually being spent. I mean, that seems to be a huge issue right now about like any of this social justice stuff, DEI. Is there any evidence that this is leading to better student outcomes? Like you talked about like the conversations that you had about like culture, and this is just their culture. And then, they need to see themselves as activists and all of that kind of stuff. And it goes down to, do you remember, around that time, like 2021 or so, the Smithsonian, the African American History Museum, they posted that thing about white culture, and it said things like maintaining a schedule, showing up on time, hard work. Like these are all things rooted in whiteness. And right. I just couldn't believe it, because that seems to be like aligned with the message that the kids were getting at your school. And it's like, what's going to serve these kids? You don't have to tell these kids that are from the hood. I taught in those communities too. Like you don't have to tell them that they're oppressed. They know every day. They know. They know that the odds are against them. So what is going to serve them best? Wouldn't it be those kinds of things? Wouldn't it be the things that are now being labeled as like white, like things like hard work and quantifiable measures and being diligent, being conscientious? Like, aren't those the things that would get them out? And then instead they're being told that those things are essentially wrong because they're rooted in like whiteness and white culture. I mean, I just don't see any kind of data connection between this social justice education that seems to have taken over the colleges of education, and therefore kind of filters all the way down, like trickle down. I don't see any connection between that and better student outcomes, as far as like getting into positions where they can, uplift themselves and be a cycle breaker for their families.
Sure. Absolutely. Well, so here's the thing, and I have to be really clear on this, because, so many people I feel like have wanted to accuse me of, like, because of the criticism I've made of kind of this critical social justice in education, they think that I'm like the PragerU guy who wants to bring in a conservative curriculum. I have never, ever said that. If anything, I would be just as strongly opposed to this idea of bringing in like a patriotic, conservative curriculum as a replacement. That's never been my angle. And I think you make a really good point that there's an opportunity cost. All this time you're spending on DEI and teaching kids they're oppressed. Well, who's really oppressing them? This kind of phantom that lurks throughout society in the school, or the actual school district that can't get them a whiteboard, that doesn't spend their money on the students, that can't provide them with a good education, that has them reading at as 10th graders reading at 3rd grade level. Who's really oppressing them? Yeah. And I think that the reason many of these higher up administrators like DEI is because it's a distraction. It takes the focus out of them and it creates a new enemy. And this is something I said at when I resigned. I called out basically what I saw as the intention of what the superintendent brought a lot of division and ugliness, and stirred up a lot of racial animosity between blacks and Hispanics and whites that had been simmering, but she exploited it. I think she did it for her own ends. Do you mind if I actually, like, I can pull up, I can read you right now, sure, short paragraph what I said. Let me just quickly pull this up. I think another link, because
for sure
I have it.
While you're doing that, like I've talked about this a lot. Like there's an inherent tension between activism and education, because activism assumes you know the right answer, and now it's just about implementation. And education, kind of by definition, says I don't know the right answer and I'm going to go find it. So when teachers, are promoting this idea of activism, it's antithetical to what education really should be about. It's not just, here I have what needs to get done. Now just go do it. It's because then any kind of curiosity of like, are you sure that this is what we're supposed to do? Or where are the potential unintended consequences of what you're doing? Like none of that seems to be allowed in the conversation. It's like punishes curiosity, which is already an issue within schools in the traditional, like Prussian school model of an obedience model, exchanging curiosity for compliance. There's already a compliance element built in So now
Right.
when you mix that with activism, then it's just like, all right, well, now they're becoming minions for your activist agenda.
Exactly. No, I agree. And it's just such an ethical violation of everything I remember. Like, when I became a teacher, I really, clung to like Plato's allegory of the cave, and this idea that, that was kind of part of my philosophy of education. It was about curiosity. It was about asking questions. And, I realized that like our school system was in a lot of trouble when you couldn't even ask those questions or have that curiosity in a staff meeting, because if you can't do that among the adults, have adult conversations, and there's only one kind of like ideological path you can follow as a teacher, what's it going to be like in the classroom? Here's what I said. So like, I'll just read this quickly. When I stood up, this is a part of it. I said, our schools are on the verge of collapse from behavioral chaos, violence, staff burnout, and a 10 to 12% student proficiency rate in math and reading. These are the fruits of Miss Placencia, that's the superintendent's half decade with the district, for which she has been rewarded a 45% increase in her base salary, earning her over $300,000 a year with a taxpayer-funded pension worth $16 million. Okay. I said, the article says, and this is paraphrasing me, McCormick said Placencia's focus on race is meant to distract parents from the school system's poor performance. And then they quoted me, and this is what I said. I said, suddenly, this is no longer about her incompetence, but the ghosts of implicit bias and racism haunting our schools, which she will now exercise through diversity, equity, and inclusion that will cost the district millions. The narrative she has seized upon has emboldened the ideological infiltration of critical theories into the district and classroom. So, I saw her. I don't know how much she really believes this stuff. I don't know how much a lot of them do.
Yeah.
But I think what it does is when your school is failing and you're making a lot of money, it's really hard to look internally and say, why? Well, like Waukegan Public Schools, why are we failing? Well, there wasn't a curriculum in place for any of these social studies classes I saw, and probably English and science and math to a degree as well. And but you blame white supremacy, which kind of exists in the ether. And when you start to blame white teachers, it's their implicit bias, it's their lack of they don't teach in a way that these kids understand culturally. What a great scapegoat. And that idea too, that's an idea that I mean, it's so crazy when people will throw accusations out against people like you and me, like you guys are racist because whatever. But they can use books and methodologies by people like Gloria Ladson-Billings, culturally relevant pedagogy, who I think a lot of these people have even read it. But she says one of the opening lines in her books is race and intellectuality are inseparably tied. Now, if I said that, I mean, this is like early social Darwinist eugenics argument, but she really believes. Now, I don't know if she's necessarily making a genetic argument or a cultural argument, but she says race. I mean, she's the whole irony is they talk about race is just a social construct, but she uses that construct as the basis for her entire theory. And I think that's why I did have success in the classroom. I said this from the minute I got into the classroom to the minute I left. And I would tell my students this, I'd tell their parents this, I'd tell everyone else this, and some of the other teachers and admin didn't like it. The kids actually liked it and the parents liked it, but it didn't make me popular among the system. I said, I'm going to give you the same education that the white kids in Lake Forest, which is where I went to school, a very wealthy community, 20 minutes away, get. I'm going to hold you to the same expectations and the same standards. They did not allow failure from their students. They did not lower expectations. I'm not doing the same for you. And I did. I had kids amazingly, wasn't always consistent. It was hard work. It took a lot of effort on my half, but kids doing their homework, taking notes. I mean, I ran like a real classroom would be run in a white community. So it's ironic, I think there's a lot of projection there when they accuse you of being culturally incompetent or being racist. I think it's just because they don't know how to address their own failures, and they want, even as a teacher, I mean, it's really nice to be able to say, hey, well, I do the best I can, but man, this racist society just makes it so the kids won't read. So, I'm just going to have a good time with the kids. And a lot of teachers, that is their attitude. They're just like, what, we're just going to build relationships and have fun, and they'll have a friend in me, and that's really what matters, because they're screwed anyway. The system's set up against them. God, what a terrible mentality! How destructive that is to a kid's spirit when a teacher believes that society is so set up against you that it's not even worth them for trying. For the kid too, a lot of these kids,
hopelessness.
Why would you? Hopelessness, absolute hopelessness.
Yeah.
So this ideology, even despite all like the feel good rhetoric, and propaganda surrounding it, it is an utterly depressing, hopeless, bleak, empty ideology that leads kids nowhere but on the belief that they will forever be victims, that they will forever be at the mercy of an oppressive class, that they can never succeed.
Yeah. And like you said, like, I like the wording you use, like it's in the ether. I've said this a lot. Like, find me an example of a policy that's inherently racist, that's causing bad outcomes, and we'll fight it together. Like, let's go.
Sure.
But when when it's so not specific, and it's kind of like, well, it's just everywhere. It's the water you're swimming. You can't pick out just like one cup of water. It's everywhere. Then the kids are like, well, then what's the point of even trying? What's the point of working hard in the classroom, especially then when hard work is seen as white, or when, like all this stuff is just, what do you think drives it? Because I get so confused, and naturally I just want to lean into curiosity. I'd like talking to as many quote unquote woke people as possible, especially in education, the ones that will talk to me, which is almost none of them. Okay. What is driving this? Is it like you said, is it just a way to excuse your own poor behavior? Like what is it? Why do they think that this is the right approach when there's no evidence to show that? And we do know, just logically, we know that. And if you taught in the hood at all for any kind of amount of time, even just like a year or two, then that even in the same neighborhood where these kids, might only get the proper nutrition at school, there's empty cupboards and refrigerators at their house, the power's getting cut off all the time. But there are kids that still stay diligent, that come to school early to get extra work done, that ask for extra credit, that really push forward, that, when they don't have Wi-Fi at their home, they go to the local Starbucks just to get the work done. They get out. Kids get out of the hood. People all the time. Like, a lot of kids that I found, they weren't exposed to individuals who got out of that bad situation through education. They know maybe the drug dealer or the person who became an athlete, and those like kind of cliche roles, but they don't know the people who just dedicated, put their what is it? Like, nose to the grindstone or whatever they say, and just like keep hustling at school and academics and reading and to get those skills to go out into the world. And I do think that in the world, conservatives too, they love those stories. They love the story of the kid who came from nothing and worked really hard. And I think you will get advantages. I don't think it's like, oh, well, we're not going to hire you because you're black, nearly as, I'm sure there's pockets of that. Of course, there's racism still exists, but I think there's a lot of people that are like, wow, that's an awesome story. You show a lot of grit, and grit is what's in short supply right now for all employers. I mean, that goes for across wealthy kids, white kids, Asian kids, whatever. They're looking for grit. They're looking for people who can overcome things. And if you're able to do that puts you at such an advantage for going out into the world, but they're not even exposed to that being a possibility.
Yeah, I think so. You asked a really good question. Like, why do teachers do this?
Like, where is
excuse?
This?
I think,
yeah.
Look, human psychology, as we know, is incredibly complex, and there's several layers. I think that a lot of it is self-preservation. I'm not saying that these teachers are like malevolent, like they just all. I mean, there's plenty of teachers who are just like, hey, this is a good gig, and I'm going to go along with it. But when you're trying every day, and the system is working against you, just like it is the kids, it's really hard to keep morale up. You can do it 4 years, 5 years, 6 years. It starts to really get to you. And when you keep being confronted with failure from your school district, things aren't working with students, it's sometimes easier to resign and say, this is just a dysfunctional society, dysfunctional country. And I resign trying to teach these kids to read. I'm going to be the best friend they have because that's what they need. I heard a lot of teachers say that, like, they really need a role model. They really need a friend. And with good intentions, I saw a lot of teachers really, and look, they did. There were some teachers that built really great relationships with kids. Didn't do a thing for them academically, but built good relationships, which is an important part. But that at least made them feel somewhat successful. Like, kids, if you come in and only 10% of your class has done the homework and they're not paying attention, and that's your focus, which it should be for a teacher, that's your job, you're going to get really depressed. And I dealt with that. It took, towards the end, it took its toll on me because I refused to kind of resign to failure. I will say this, there were times where I did feel like I just like completely like there were, whether it was weeks, months, days where I felt like I was mentally just at my end and I was like, just wasn't there, and the kids could tell. And then I kind of get that energy back, but it was hard because it was mentally, I was up and down. I'd kind of muster the strength to like keep fighting. And then a lot of times, something happens with admin or there's a terrible fight and you're not backed up, and it's just, and then you just give up. So I think that's part of it. But what I also think, and people are like, well, why did you name your blog Chalkboard Heresy? I think there is a strong missionary component that I felt early on when I was going into teacher. Like, you are a special class. You're going into a high poverty area with oppressed, downtrodden kids, and you have an opportunity to help them understand their condition. You're oppressed, by whiteness, by the patriarchy, by capitalism. You can save these kids' minds and free them. That's the way to help them succeed. And look, it's a lot easier because it's really hard to get kids' reading scores up. Mm-hmm. It's really hard to teach them to be good students. It's really easy to have them nodding their heads and blaming other things or saying, wow, that was inspiring, Mr. McCormick. I never realized that, like just feeding them propaganda. But a lot of teachers, I think that's what got them through the day and still does, is they go in there and I'm like, I'm going to teach them to be good people. Good meaning they have the right ideology, the right sets of beliefs. And I'm going to teach them to be like freedom fighters for social justice. And, instead of writing an essay and teaching them how to do that, they do a rap project on social justice. And that feels good. And I felt like what had happened to me is when I began to reject that and I began to go in the other direction. And it wasn't just the ideology I rejected, it was also the methodology. Like, no, Black kids should not be rapping their essays. They should be learning to write properly because that's how you survive in this world. I became a heretic. It was like I was part of like this priestly class, and all of a sudden I was on the outside. And I think a lot of teachers feel that way. And I don't think actually, like, if you go into a school, there's only maybe like, I don't know. I'd say like, yes, 70% of teachers, especially like English social studies, are probably liberal leaning, liberal progressive, but you only have a maybe 15 to 20% that are like really hardcore, depending on the school.
Right.
But sometimes that's all it takes. They dominate the narrative. And a lot of people they go along with it because they're like, yeah.
I think it's, and it's, I don't mean to use this like pejorative term, but I think it's cowardice. I think it's so scary to be called one of those names: racist, sexist, homophobic, whatever it is, like it's so scary to do that you just don't want to push back at all. Especially, I mean, you're talking about, you bring someone in who's, they're Black, they speak in a way that's like very, like powerful and confident, and they know this, and they have their understanding of the world that you just could never possibly understand because of the skin color that you have and where you come from. It's very difficult to push back. And that's why I just advocate for curiosity, like genuine curiosity. Like, can you show me how this is going to benefit them when they're graduating, going out into the job place. Can you help me? Can you show me that, like through some sort of data, through some sort of quantifiable measure? Like, I think that leaning toward into that curiosity is the approach to get around some of that fear. Because there might be teachers listening that are seeing this and they're like, well, I'm not speaking up. You out of your mind. I'm not pushing back. I talked to a Black teacher during that same time, like 2020, 2021, who was here in Los Angeles, was at like a very wealthy private school. And he was one of the only Black faculty members. He said all these, white progressive women were pushing like the racial, racist narratives and stuff. And he was scared to push back, even though he was a Black guy. Cause he's just like, they're gonna use the same kind of rhetoric against me, like how I'm, a race traitor and stuff like that, even though he's the Black one. So
internalized racism, right?
Yeah. But it's like, I think that the approach is to lean into curiosity, but even that, we know that curiosity is seen as a dangerous, refusal to just accept, do the work, as they say, do the work, do the readings, do the work, do the work, do the work, as opposed to like, read these books and then ask whatever questions you have so we can work this out, so we can work out all this stuff. I've given the school I was at last year, I gave Peggy McIntosh white privilege to the students. And I was like, let's pick it apart. What's legitimate here? What's not? What's maybe more based on class and less based on race? Like, I'm fine bringing in Ibram Kendi into the classroom, but it has to be brought in a way that you can debate it and discuss it and look at all angles, not just do what I say. This is what's correct. Follow exactly the way that I put it out there. That's not education. That's not how we teach these kids to, as I always, what we just promote all the time, which is critically think. It's the opposite. It's the same obedience model that people like John Taylor Gatto were speaking out against, but now it has this extra flavor of added activism and critical social justice stuff that just makes it so much worse. And that's how these ideas make it into the mainstream. And when everything was happening with George Floyd, it's how all these ideas just put the black box in your profile picture. Just say the thing that you're supposed to say. Just say the thing that you're supposed to say, because I think it's that combination of obedience. And then one other thing that I saw is I had a student a couple of years ago who she was like, look, Mr. Roosh, our whole lives we were told how these civil rights activists, like in Birmingham in the 1960s and everything, Montgomery, like how they were heroes, like activists, social justice, civil rights activists are heroes. They're American heroes. I want to be an American hero. Just let me get in line. Let me go out. Let me go do that. Let me get sprayed by the fire hose, because they're heroes. So as soon as the opportunity is there for them to feel that way and to be a civil rights leader, they can do that. And it might just be online, just putting up the little black box or putting out a tweet or something like that. But they want to be that. And this gives them a pathway to get that feeling like, oh, I'm making some sort of really positive difference in the world, whether or not they actually are.
Yeah, there's definitely, I think, in our society kind of this, and this isn't just new to our society. This isn't something that just arose in the last 10 years, but like human beings fundamentally have a crisis of meaning and purpose in their life. And it's all about what fills that vacuum for you. And if you're young, if you're young, the idea like I'm a revolutionary. I am like, what an exciting concept for a young person to be a revolutionary. As I've gotten older, it's really boring when people are like, I mean, and look, I know everyone thinks like I'm like Mr. Right Wing because I do make a lot of jokes and talk about stories and make comments. I'm much more critical of the left than I am the right. Although a lot of people, if they follow me regularly, see actually I criticize a lot of hard right, like the Nick Fuentes and the Groyper movement, the anti-Semites, and actually like the legitimate literal racists. I'm very hypercritical of them. I think they're toxic and they need to be driven out of the conservative movement. But it's boring when someone's like, hey, Frank, what's your opinion on climate change? I'm like, I don't really know because I'm not a scientist. I don't have all the facts. I think there's, it's a lot more fun to be like, it's a hoax started by China to get us to this, or to say it's the end of the world. It's, I feel like and I feel like actually I've struggled with that, even like as I've been on social media longer, like that's one of the things I hate about Twitter is it kind of forces you to take a side and to push narratives because you get rewarded for it. Yeah. Some of my most the tweets that get millions of people, watching them, I'm always kind of like, oh, gosh, that was a joke that may have been, it was funny. There's some truth to it. It's not necessarily a joke like I'd like what repeated a lot. I'm like, why did that get attention? And then I'll write something like really thought provoking, and it's like 15 people reacted.
Yep.
I'm like, well, that sucks. So,
that's the algorithm. Yeah. That's what the kids are growing up
that's the algorithm. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what kids are growing up with too. But I think actually this is where I think we need like we need to kind of rediscover. I've always been a guy who jokes around a lot. I think that's unfortunately sometimes it hurts me because people don't realize I'm saying things tongue in cheek. But I think we really need to get back to the use of humor as a way to diffuse situations and also talk about uncomfortable things, and also broach both sides of an issue.
Yeah.
And I think if, that's kind of like the role historically, or I guess you could say kind of from an evolutionary perspective, maybe that's the role humor has played in allowing societies to move forward in some ways, is to say things you can't say, to ask questions, to be curious if it's, disguised as a joke. I'll give you an example. This has been an issue of mine recently, but like there's been this debate online about like Black Santas. And it's one of those things where people get very, they're either like, look, this is a tradition. There's a mythos behind it. Everyone's got to be on the same page. You can't tell your kids Santa's real, but there's like, well, there's a Black Santa and a white Santa. And then there's people like, no, representation's important. And so I like made this joke or something like, what do you tell like a Black kid? Like, hey, the white Santa doesn't come here because he's afraid, like, of going to the project and his sleigh's going to get shot and robbed. And, yeah, it's a joke. And like, I know people are like, oh, like you said that, but there's some truth there. And that was the point. Like people laughed because it was, I thought it was funny because it's uncomfortable, but there's some truth there. Like what does that message send when you have to have segregated national, like, characters that have Santa's historically been white? I get that. And if he was Black, I'd be saying the same things. But like, if you're a Black kid, like the idea, like, Mama, is there a white Santa? Like, does he not come to us because we're Black? Is he, is he like afraid to come to our neighborhood? Like, oh yeah, he goes to the white kids. We get the Black Santa. Like, I mean, and these are discussions we need to have, but I think you have to a lot of times to get, use humor as a way to kind of break down that discomfort. People are going to call you a racist anyway. There's still, there's people that are going to get offended and not laugh. But I do think there's like, if we bring that back, if we bring and that's what I like about like Dave Chappelle, even if I don't always agree with him, he brings up really uncomfortable things about race, about gender, sexuality, all these things. It show like things that if you said online, not in the context of a joke, if he was on stage with a mic, you would be like driven out of every job ever. But he's able to do it and actually start to have really interesting discussions between both sides. And you hear that a lot. You hear people on both the left and the right. One thing they're like, I like Dave Chappelle. And I'm like, yeah, he's probably more left. They're like, yeah, I know. But like, but he's so funny. And because he's funny, people are able to listen to him,
right,
and maybe consider ideas that they normally wouldn't consider.
Yeah, it makes it entertaining. I mean, that's why you say use humor. Like, that's why I've always been successful in the classroom, is it's like, it is a show. Like I am entertaining you, right, through that process. The funny Black Santa, like there's so many jokes that you could point out to bring up very real issues. Like what if it was Black Santa? How would wealthy white communities feel like about a Black guy breaking into their house in the middle of the night? You know what I mean? Is Black Santa going to get shot? Like there's so much, how many cops are called? Like there's a Black guy roaming through the neighborhood wearing flashy clothes, shimmying down, going down chimneys and stuff like that. Like there's so much to happen there. I think that one of the things that I've been able to do in the classroom that was very successful, and I do now online with my students, is just modeling nuance, just modeling it. Like just taking on both sides of any issue, anything, flat earth, like doesn't really matter. It's just like trying to like pull apart all that nuance of what are the different sides, what are the different perspectives, laying them all out for the students, then having them go to what they think is best. I mean, I think that's just like, if you do that as the leader of the class, if you just say like, look, I don't know, here's what I have in front of me. Here's the information. Okay, what do you want to do with it? That's a completely different approach, and allows kids to weigh it out for themselves and arrive at the best conclusions on their own, and not just be this automaton who does whatever they're told to do. I think it starts in front of as the teacher. And when teachers refuse to acknowledge, we ask a teacher, like, can you name a few positive things that Donald Trump did during his presidency? No, there's nothing. There's nothing. You could do that in a conservative classroom too. What are some positives of Joe Biden? Nothing. There's nothing. Like, then kids are only pushed in one direction. And what you need to do is show, like, this is complex. If the country is split 50-50 on a lot of issues, then it has to be complex kind of by definition.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think nuance is a lost art. A lot of people, even my family doesn't understand why I like to debate and discuss so much. They're like, Frank, why do you always have to wade in controversy? Why do you always do these? But what surprises a lot of people, like, I'm going to have this guy, I'm at our office right now. This is not part of my official capacity. It's just where I'm set up. But like, there's I describe him as like kind of he's a black nationalist, kind of militant guy, but he's a really great community activist, great guy. His name's Brother Blanks. And he walks around with a beret and and all his pictures, he goes, Black Power. He sits with me, but we have this great relationship.
Yeah.
And people are like, we get together and my audience were like, what are you doing standing next to this like black nationalist revolutionary? And then they do to him, like, what are you standing next to this like racist right winger?
Yeah.
And we're going to kind of both do this like kind of presentation to kind of talk about that, because what we've done is we've used a lot of humor and to diffuse things and have really great conversations. And we actually found out we disagree really hardly on 20% of the issues, but on 80% we agree with. And how we diffused humor. I mean, we went against, because he was in my community. Me and him clashed for a while, and finally he heard me talk, and he was like, it was actually after I gave my presentation at the school board meeting before I resigned. And he's got this great way of speaking. I can't do it. But he gets up after I do. He goes, I disagree with what a lot of Mr. McCormick said, but I respect him. And everyone was quiet and everyone listened, and I wasn't there. And I reached out to him after that. And I was like, man, I said, I'll be honest. I said, I know I've called you a radical revolutionary. I haven't liked you like being involved with the kids, because I thought, he said, maybe we just understand each other. I said, let me take you out to lunch. We went out to lunch. The first thing he says to me, he goes, can either one of us afford to be seen with a racist? And I started laughing. I mean, and that was the joke. And, from there we started laughing and talking, and we actually, we've done like some good work. We did like a Christmas project, brought presents to kids in the projects. I went to his place. Like, yeah, there's stuff I don't agree with. There's stuff that, he's got an American flag with a big, like a noose on it. I mean, he's really into this. And I'm like, okay, it's not my thing, but like we have discussions, and I see the good he does. He sees the good I do, and we disagree, but we keep the dialogue alive. But I really think like, we got to go back to, we have to be okay with being funny again. I think that should be the slow, make America great again, make America healthy, make America funny again. Look at all like authoritarian movements, Nazism, communism. They are humorless.
Yeah.
There is
Critical
zero
social justice.
You cannot be funny.
I know.
It's just like not allowed. And that's scary, because humor is, because then I think the reason is because they know these, whether you're fascist or communist, that humor is a way to talk about uncomfortable things and unite people.
Yeah.
And I think I really learned that. I mean, I've always been that way, but the power of it stood out to me once. I was in college. I was 19 years old. I was this young. I did 1 year at University of Illinois at Chicago, and I took an African-American religious traditions course. I was one of two white kids in there. And the other white kid was getting in this argument that the teacher was very militant, Black Power, and he was very ideological. And the teacher just goes off on this 20-minute rant about like, you white people stick together, this and that. And I just stopped. He got dead silent. I raised my hand. He said, you better be careful what you say, because I am like about to like, which a teacher shouldn't say, but okay. So I said, look, I know this is tense. I know you think that white people are like, we're in on it against you. But I said, I said, we just grow up in the same kind of neighborhoods and circumstances and associate the way you do. It's not like I see another white person say, hey, you're white, I'm white, want to go to the Gap. And he stops. And there's like 3 seconds of silence. And I have never heard belly laughs just for like 2 minutes. And he starts crying. All the other black kids in the class laugh. He's hitting the board. And then we spent the next 30 minutes, like mostly be at him because the other white kid was like too scared. And the other black kids were like, I don't know what the hell just happened. And we had this most amazing discussion. Now, if I had done that today in another context, someone would be like, yeah, Frank, that was problematic. You brought up white people and stereotypes about where they shop,
Right.
and that language can be harmful. But we got to be okay, risky humor, breaking it down, bringing people together, having conversations. And so, I don't know. I'm not saying I've like given up. Like, there's certain people that that just, if they're not there yet, if they can't laugh, if they can't smile, I think you just got to keep going, keep being yourself, and you'll eventually get through to them. I've had more and more people, especially over the last few years, people that would have normally disagreed with me, even some teachers at the district I left who like hated me, who tried to hurt me, who like took stuff out of like my medical file, and leaked it to like the press. Like I had to take an FMLA for depression. And so they tried to like discredit it, like he's mentally unstable. He was out for like depression. Like, yeah, crazy stuff. People that like wanted to hurt me, like have like come back to me and said, you know what? They said, some of the stuff that happened since you were left has made me think, so, there's some kernels of truth to what you were saying. And that's all I want. They should not, I don't need people that, you shouldn't agree with me 100%, but if you can get people to think just a little bit. Yeah. And frankly, as a teacher, I always felt, and I still feel like it's boring. Like there's nothing more boring for me than talking to someone that agrees with me 100%. Like when I've been on podcasts where someone is 100% with me, I'm like, oh, like when's this going to end? Like I want to be challenged. I want to talk. I want to debate. As long as it's like respect. If people start getting nasty and I don't have tolerance for that. But
yeah, I mean, that's how I started this podcast. It was to talk to people who are differently minded. Like it started because it was a lot of like the transgender stuff was happening. It's like 2018. And I was like, I've never had an actual like long form conversation with a trans person before. If I just say like, hey, you want to have a conversation? It's a little weird. So I was like, let's record it and like, let's learn in real time. And I'm with you. I think that, but then it's also like just bring on people who have a different perspective to share what that is. What do you think is the solution? Like where do we go from here? And then also, I mean, kind of aligned with that is, what are you doing now? What is your work now that you're out of the classroom to try and bring awareness to these issues and everything like that?
Yeah. So what's the solution? I think building relationships through humor and lightheartedness with people that are open to it. It's so funny to me because someone on the outside will say, Frank, you're transphobic, you're homophobic, you're racist, you're this and that. They have no clue. And I don't parade it around. I know some people do. They really like to do like, hi, I'm this, and these are my friends. But I have like 4 people on my phone who are transgender, transsexual. Okay, I'll say 3 who like we have a good relationship with. We talk and debate. They, some things they agree with really strongly on, some things they disagree. I know some detransitioners. I have friends, like I talk like Brother Blanks. He's like, I have all these in my personal life. It's people that don't take the time to get to know me or don't have the conversation. They want to straw man me and just boogie down. I'm like, I can't help you. And I always invite people like, if you have an issue, like, let's sit down, let's talk.
Yeah.
And the people that will do that show me that like they are actually intellectually curious. They actually want to push society in the right direction, because that's really should be our goal. My goal is not, there have been things I've argued that have been hardline ideological. I get that, but it's not because I just like, I need that ideology in my life to give me meaning. It's because I've been like, okay, on this issue, at this moment in time, I think this political party or this group is the way to move things in the right direction. I will very quickly, if the Republicans go the wrong way, or the libertarian, I vote. I mean, people don't realize this about me. I voted, I'm embarrassed to say some of these, but I voted Green Party, Democrat, Libertarian, Republican. I am not as ideological hardline as people think. They think that because sometimes I get really focused on these issues and I'll push really hard, but so yeah, I think you got to have conversations with different people, and the people that, if they're not going to meet with you, if they're not actually going to have a conversation, they just want to hurt you. They just want to make themselves feel better about attacking someone they think is a boogeyman. That's fine. But I always keep that door open. I'm always kind of like, look, when you're ready, My door's open. Let's go meet for coffee. In terms of what I'm doing now, so it's very similar, but there's a big shift. All the like ideological, the culture war stuff. Don't get me wrong. I think it's engaging. It's fun to talk about. It's important, but I've taken it and I've put it in a box and I've compartmentalized it away from the work I'm doing with this organization that I founded with two of my friends called Parents Care. Because what we realized is like it's not that like we're unwilling outside of the organization to have those conversations, or we don't think they're important, or we don't think there should be a dialogue, but we're trying to build a coalition on what we think are the four unifiers: academic excellence, transparency, student first budgets, and student safety. Those are not ideological. They're not political. Now, as an executive director of this group, sometimes, I've gotten up and spoken to people and they'll say, I saw your Twitter account. I've heard you. I saw you on Candace Owens. I saw you on Fox News. You said this. I said, yeah, I'm not denying that I am a political person as you are. But just as you're able to if you're a doctor, I'm assuming you don't talk politics with your patients. I separate that. I don't there are certain school issues that we're not, people come to us. Are you going to talk about this book? No, we're not talking about that. There's plenty of other groups to do that. We're talking about these four issues because we're not a partisan group. We're not an ideological group. We're focused on creating better schools through community oversight. And we're trying to create a coalition around that, regardless of what your politics are. There is no litmus test to work with Parents Care. Liberal, libertarian, hardcore left progressive, hardcore right conservative. If you believe that our schools need to be more transparent, that budgets need to put students first, that student safety needs to be a priority. We particularly talk about the sex abuse crisis that's happening in not just our school districts, but many schools across the country. And you just think schools need to be transparent. And I'll tell you, I've told people, I said, you come to our office, you can go through files. There's nothing coded. We don't use student safety as some code word. We don't talk about the bathrooms issue. I don't want to, again, there's enough people talking about that. I want to talk about these four nonpartisan. I want to bring as many people together on these issues as we can. And, that's where I'm at. That doesn't mean that on Twitter and outside, I still don't like to talk about the other stuff. That doesn't mean that if people pull me aside on the street and ask me something, that doesn't mean that I may not go talk about it and that I don't think it's important. But if people were to ask, one of our pillars is academic excellence, high student achievement. So, kind of built into that is that's not political. That's not ideological. So, if someone were to come to us and say, well, what do you think about the schools? Let's say hypothetically, someone in town really wanted to come to us. I said, you guys can't ignore this anymore. The school's bringing in this big DEI department, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they're going to do X, Y, and Z. The question for me and our organization wouldn't be what do we personally feel about it? Do we ideologically agree with it? It will be, is it going to improve student outcomes?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that's it. And if it is, if there's hardcore empirical data that's going to suggest that test scores will rise as a result of this, that it'll improve student achievement, who knows? Maybe we'll support it. Yeah. But that's an issue for another time. So that's what I think should guide these things. I think there's opportunity costs. Every time you spend as a school district talking about something not related to academics or student safety or transparency, yeah.
So Parents Care, is that a do you go and talk to schools? Do you work with smaller independent schools? How does that, what's the work that you guys do?
Right now, we're just local. We focus kind of on two North Shore school districts. Basically, our primary work is to provide oversight. So we spend time submitting Freedom of Information Act requests, finding out what is going on in the schools, looking through financial records, and we also kind of, look, we're not. It's not that we don't have opinions. I'm not going to say we're just completely neutral on things. We do have arguments, and we send out mailers to certain homes. I'll show you. They definitely get people's attention, but I got one right here. And so we talk about Like, I don't know if you can see this, but
Yeah.
it's basically like 55% of your property taxes go to Lake Forest schools. And then on the back, how they're doing and how the spending goes. 46 cents goes to classroom instruction and teacher salaries. 54 cents is on overhead. And the trajectory for administrator salaries has been going up, and the trajectory for student achievement has been going down. Yeah. So we kind of try and educate people on this stuff. Sometimes, people accuse us, it's a little sensational, sometimes the emails, but we are trying to get people fired up because we're talking about your kids. We're talking about people's tax money. Like, we don't, and the schools, their answer is always like, oh, we have a 5-year plan. How many I can't tell you how many 5-year plans I've heard school districts have. It's a perpetual cycle. And I think high schools do it specifically because a lot of times, if you have a kid that goes to high school, by the time they're out, you forgot about it. They have another 5-year plan for the next group. So we do stuff like that. We investigate. We have helped bring light and expose when the district's hidden, like, I must say at least 4 issues of like employee misconduct in the past 12 months that the school district was like trying to keep a secret, that people wouldn't know about it. One of them, they hired someone who was actively investigated. We brought that out and the school was forced to get rid of him.
That's great.
It's something we didn't plan to focus on, like, but when we started, I don't think we realized how big of a problem it was. So we've met a lot of resistance. The school district superintendent called us an opposition group. They don't want to communicate or meet with us, but we've got a lot more support than they realize. And they're starting to realize, like,
what of those four like, fundamental principles and pillars, like what do they disagree with? You know what I mean? Like that's the problem, is like, will the superintendent come on and have a conversation with you?
We met once with him privately, and he was, you could tell he was like just seething in anger.
But
and
not
then
publicly, not come on the podcast.
Not publicly. No, they won't do anything like that.
So there we go. That's the problem.
They don't like, I think fundamentally they feel like they don't like that we've, as they would say, that we are an attack opposition group is how they describe it. Here's the thing. And I was a public school teacher. Like, when you're in that position, when you're making hundreds of thousands of dollars as an administrator, you got to be ready to stand up to public scrutiny and public heat. And, I was talking to someone from Germany, and they were basically said, like, that Americans have a much higher tolerance for like misappropriation in public government and corruption. Mm-hmm. They're like, in Europe, like you, for example, charge the wrong lunch or put like a candy bar on like a school credit card. It's a story. You will be like dragged through the streets, not literally, but like in the news, because they have zero tolerance for it. And here, we have put heat on the school districts, like having, quietly letting sex offenders resign, or not telling people that, that their teacher was having inappropriate conduct with a student and just letting them quietly leave and not informing parents, declining academic scores, spending $30,000 on promotional videos celebrating the district. Like, you're going to get some heat for that. And but that's why you're paid almost $500,000 a year. Stand up to that heat, come talk to us. And if you don't like it, then make some changes. And if we're really wrong, then tell us, then get into a debate with us. Tell us exactly where we're wrong. Yeah. But it's easier to say they've instead, one of the unfortunate things, I think it's going to change with, getting some new, if we get some new school board members in, is that so much of our time has, like, we could be having constructive conversations and doing work together. And we're not making any money off this. This is a big expense, for the donors that fund this. It's there's no profit in it. That we can volunteer our services to, like, look through their finances, help them with curriculum, help the schools become better. They would rather spend time, and they have, going on public shows and telling everyone what terrible people we are, and look at Fank McCormick's Twitter account, and don't take these guys seriously. But you know what? You can only attack people for so long before people, I think, especially in this community, they've seen, like, we're not going away. They've seen that, we do care. We work hard for the kids, and look, when we make mistakes, whether it's in the tone we've used, whether we've said something, we're the first to say, yeah, we're learning and growing. We're just three dads. We're not like experts in this. So yeah.
Yeah. And, and just wrapping it up, I mean, it's kind of full circle because you're an activist that's actually trying to uplift these communities, including communities of color. Like, how ironic is that? That you're actually doing the work of activism, which is bringing people awareness of an injustice and advocating for not some vague thing. During the George Floyd protests and stuff, you say like, well, what are you specifically marching for? The Women's March in 2016 when Trump was elected. What are you marching for? You ask 10 different people, you get 10 different answers. But you guys are very specific. It's like, this needs to change, and this thing, or like this specific, bill should get passed. Like, it's right there, and you're doing the activist work, which is so ironic because that's what the kids, are kind of led to want to do. But it's easier to go after, as we said in the beginning, like the ether, where you're going very specific. And I think that's just it's interesting. That's interesting.
Well, yeah, I guess I'm one of the only Nazis in history that, purposefully worked with Black and brown students and took them to the Holocaust Museum every year.
Yeah, right. Trying to advocate so that they can be more successful.
Yeah, it's a really good cover. One day they'll find out that, it's just it's so silly.
Well, the lack of transparency of the districts is really a shame. Frank, thanks for coming on here, sharing your story, the work that Parents Care is doing. That's amazing. I was not aware of that. So I'm aware now. Put in the show notes, and check out parentscare.org. And anything else people can find you on X, Chalkboard Heresy. And
it's just Fank McCormick at CB Heresy. Yeah. They can reach out to us on the website, send me an email. We're, happy, organizationally, we're not really, again, we're kind of very strict on our kind of mission and pillar discipline, but off the record, people want to talk to me on Twitter. I'm happy to talk about whatever too. And thanks for having me, Will. It was a great discussion. And
it really was.
I think.
Thank you so much for the work you're doing, man, and for sharing story.
Well, thank you.
That sounded like it was really hard to go through.
Yeah, it was. Have a few psychological scars, but life goes on, and looking forward to continue. I think together, you and I can do a lot of good as forward teachers to change things. Even if people are always going to criticize us, but that's okay.
Yeah, I love that. All right, guys, thanks for listening.